A reading from Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 29. And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to greet him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." And he answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Come, bring him to me." And they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood, and it has often cast him into the fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible for one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, help my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." This is the word of the Lord.
Hi, my name is Bob. I'm the lead pastor here at the meeting place. Hi. A little while ago, I injured my foot and I needed to go to emergency. And because of the timing of my arrival and some other contributing factors, I got to see a doctor very, very quickly. And when I was in the treatment room and I was stretched out to receive the stitches that were necessary, he looked at my foot after taking off, the towel or whatever I had wrapped around it, and he made this comment. He said, "It's already healing." Now, that's good news to hear, right, when you're needing treatment, so that's really great. But here's the thing that really struck me about this, because, of course, I'd been on high alert on the healing theme for a number of weeks preparing for this morning. And so when he said these words, I was just prompted to think, yes, the truth of the matter is when it comes to healing, you and I experience elements of healing all the time. We're used to sustaining injuries, and then over time we see how our skin knits itself together again, and so we understand that healing is a very natural thing. And yet, when I say that we're going to talk about healing this morning, I imagine we all become very aware of how complicated our relationship with healing is. There are people who are walking amongst us in this faith community who have experienced healing. They at one point received a prognosis that wasn't so hopeful. There are people where we prayed for healing, and we really wanted to see a change, but the healing did not occur, and they are no longer with us in this present moment. And in fact, I've been struck over the last number of weeks how many opportunities for healing have come to my attention, how often this comes up as a subject where once again I become aware of yet another person who's received difficult news, and there's a desire, a longing for us to experience healing. And so there is in this moment this suspended curiosity about what might the future hold. Will healing occur? And so I think we understand that this healing theme is a complicated one. And so I'm inviting you. I want to invite us as a faith community to consider submitting our concept or understanding of healing to the Lordship of Jesus. This is what our series is about. In fact, when I designed this teaching series, it was assembled from themes that have come up within this faith community over time, and healing was one of the subjects that came up, and I thought, yes, this is something that we should tackle. And so I want to share with you a little bit, and we're going to look at a particular Bible story that Rhonda's already read for us, but I also want to include in this story some personal reflections on my own experience with healing. Both of my parents were diagnosed with cancer. Both of them did not receive healing. Both of them were with us for a short time after they were diagnosed, and both of them are now with Jesus. And there are days when I revisit those days and think to myself, like, what happened? Like, how did this thing unfold? Because, of course, my parents were people that were really important in my life, and I miss them terribly at times, and there's a longing for me to understand more about this healing thing, so I want to share some things about my experience there. So, let's dive into healing. I've selected a passage that I think in some ways captures all of the complexity of healing when we think about our own life circumstances. So here's the story out of Mark chapter 9. It says this, "And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him." So the Gospel of Mark is written like this. If you read the entire Gospel, you get a sense of the rhythm of the writings of this person. The Gospel of Mark is the first Gospel written. The other Gospels, in fact, in some ways borrowed content from him. But Mark was in a hurry. It's almost like he's compacted all of the stories, and so we move from one story to the next, and it seems to be like in an elevated speed kind of thing, and so we burst upon the story. And so just to give context, this is chapter 9. At the beginning of chapter 9, we have this incredible story of the Transfiguration, where Jesus and James and Peter and John go, Mark writes, on top of a high mountain, and in that space, the visible world and the invisible worlds collide. Moses and Elijah, two Old Testament characters, appear, and they have a dialogue with them. This is the thing that happens just before this occurs. So you've got this amazing sacred moment on the top of the mountain where Jesus and some of his key disciples experience this moment of intersection. And then they descend down the mountain and they immediately immerse themselves in the muck and mire of life. And so there's a curiosity as to what's happening here, because Jesus arrives and he's sort of curious, like, what's happening? There's sort of a disturbance there. So we carry on. And he asks them, so this is Jesus, "What are you arguing about with them?" So these are the scribes arguing with his disciples. And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." Imagine the scene. You've got this father who is desperate. He's been trying to find a solution for his son. His son is in need of healing. He's heard about this Jesus, and he's heard about that there's a group of people that follow him, and he's discovered where they are, and so he rushes over. His son, who is mute and deaf as a result of the spirit possession, in this story doesn't, in fact, ever speak a word, but we clearly understand that there are some significant things. There are symptoms of this demon possession that cause this son to experience horrendous things that would disturb any father's heart. So the father's there desperate. The son, of course, longing to be free of this. Then there are disciples, the 9 disciples that are left behind while Jesus is up on the mountain with Peter and James and John. Then there are the scribes who, I suspect, take some perverse pleasure in being able to observe what's happening. And in light of what we hear, that disciples were not able to achieve healing for the son, probably are satisfied to recognize that, yes, I guess their convictions that Jesus is really not a big deal. His followers clearly aren't any more capable than anyone else. It sort of proves what they believe to be true of Jesus. And then I'm sure there's onlookers. There's other people who are gathered there to observe, to see what's happening. This is a little bit of an event, something to be curious about. So that's the gathering. This is the circumstances into which Jesus steps. And in a classic situation, because this is the confrontation for us when it comes to healing, there is this discovery that the disciples are unable. Unable. Can you imagine the disappointment of the Father? And so it raises the question, why were they not able to heal him? What is it that the disciples didn't do or did do? And the text doesn't give us any details. It doesn't say, well, the reason for this is this, and they failed in this way, or they didn't use the right words. But it brings to mind that when it comes to healing, I suspect that most of us would agree that we would love to discover what is the magic formula. What's the thing? What are the words that would always lead to healing? What would be the thing that would guarantee the outcome that we're hoping for? And because this text doesn't tell us what it is that the disciples didn't do or did do, there's a curiosity for us to explore, well, what might be some reasons why this didn't happen. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is this notion of God's economics when it comes to prayer. Let me just explain this to you. So, when my parents were diagnosed with cancer, I think about my mom in particular. My parents had been in pastoral ministry for over 40 years. They'd served in a number of different congregations in a number of different countries in the world. My father had been a speaker in many places, traveled to South America numerous times. He spoke up in Siberia at a number of churches there, and he'd been around. And so when the news came out that my mom had cancer and it didn't look very good, people gathered all around the church, all around the world. Like there were prayer gatherings everywhere and so on like that, and people came together and they were praying. And they were sincere. They loved my parents. They wanted good things for them, certainly my mom, as she came to mind and so on. And there's something very powerful about a group of people coming together. And so in this instance, as we look at our story, we think about, so there's 9 disciples. Surely these 9 disciples, if they came together, if they all together agreed that this boy needed to be healed, surely they should have been successful. And so it leaves us curious, well, how do the economics work? Like, is there something powerful about more people gathering? Because here's the thing that happens. When we are in need of healing, what's the very first thing we do? We try to inform as many people as we can, right? We try to share the news because there is in our minds this idea that if more people know about it, more people are praying about it, and perhaps the persuasion of the numbers of people will tip the scale. It'll persuade God somehow. It'll prove to him how strongly we feel because there's so many of us that feel the same way, and he will feel compelled to act and to intervene and cause the healing that we're hoping for. But the truth of the matter is that isn't how it turns out. So it leaves us with this curiosity about, like, how is this supposed to work? Well, we have a text in the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus makes the following comments. He says, "Again I say to you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them." So this illustrates that, yes, there is some value, obviously, about people coming together and agreeing, but notice the numbers are quite low. It's not like he's saying, like, boy, like, if 2 or 3 or more even, like the more people you can gather, the more people you can be about this thing, the better it is. It turns out that that's not actually what's at play. There isn't something that we can do as a faith community to tip the scales, to persuade him, to somehow convince God that he needs to move. And so then what is the purpose of people coming together? Because that is our practice. That is our response when healing comes into play. And I would say there's a couple of reasons that I think it's a good thing for us to come together. We experienced this on Sunday morning, certainly for the people in this room, and I think to a degree, certainly also for those who are joining us online. There's something about being in a shared space where we see each other and where it's like, I am here for the purposes of Jesus. I see that you're here for the purposes of Jesus. We've got this thing in common, and perhaps is there then room for us to say, I see your confidence in who he is. I can witness the faith that you're wanting to express in this moment, and perhaps we can even give ourselves the permission to say there's a degree of doubt in this relationship with Jesus because our humanity sometimes interferes. But there is a gift in us coming together. But the numbers, the 9 disciples, just by themselves, as a significant group of people, were not, because of their numbers, successful in responding. We return to the text in Mark. This is Jesus now speaking after he's discovered what's at stake. And he says, and he answered them, O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me. Imagine the people that are there present. What they're looking for is kindness. They're looking for gentleness. They're looking for the life-giving, hope-filled presence of Jesus. And what they get are harsh words. Can you imagine of all the things that he might say, he says, oh, faithless generation. In other words, to say, like, none of you. And the little word them is really important because he's not just speaking to the disciples. He's not just speaking to the scribes. He's not just speaking to the Father and Son. He's not just speaking to the onlookers. He's speaking to them as a whole. Oh, faithless generation, how long am I to be with you, right? Because Jesus is feeling the urgency of sharing his message and then having it carried on past his time on earth. And so there is this exasperation of a teacher who's desperately trying to pass the thing on, but people aren't catching on. And so he's expressing his disappointment in this, right? How long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? And then bring him to me. Here's the thing. I thought about this and I thought, wait a minute, I can think of another circumstance where something similar happened, right? Because remember, Jesus is up on the mountaintop. He's having this incredible sacred moment. He's interacting with Moses and Elijah, with his inner circle of disciples. They're having this incredible experience, again, where the visible and invisible worlds collide. And no sooner does he come to the bottom of the mountain, here he is once again encountering, the humanity of the world. And so he expresses this deep disappointment. Well, here's the text. If you go back to Exodus chapter 32, something similar unfolds. Here's the story. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides. On the front and on the back they were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there is a noise of war in the camp, but he said, it's not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear. And as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire and ground it to powder and scattered it on the water and made the people of Israel drink it. And Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them? And Aaron said, let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, that they are set on evil. Moses and Jesus could start a support group, right? People who come from these mountaintop experiences and then step again into the muck and mire of life and just experience such incredible disappointment. Here's Moses. He receives from God tablets where God with his very own hand wrote out the 10 commandments for him to bring to the people. These are the ancestors of the people of Jesus' day. This is the very same group of people that God invites into an adventure and introduces himself to them and says, let's do this amazing life together. And no sooner are they in the wilderness, no sooner does Moses receive the moral code by which they would live, by which their society would be formed and they would experience community just the way God imagined. And so he wants to bring this gift to them. And what does he find? They've turned their eyes away from God. They've been caught up in their own distractions. They're making their gods of their own, this golden calf. They're literally completely stepping away from anything that has anything to do with the promises of God for their future. This is what Moses encounters, and I mean, he was angry. He was so angry. He expressed his disappointment, and I'm sure that his words with Aaron, his brother, who's the high priest, weren't all that exchanged between the two of them. I'm sure that he expressed all kinds of other thoughts that he felt very strongly about. But here is what happens. Jesus similarly comes from the mountain, steps into this life, and is disappointed by what he encounters, and speaks what seem like harsh words about faith, about the lack of faith. Can you imagine how the disciples must have felt in that moment? Let's move on. And they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." He's getting the story. I think the thing to notice here is the incredible gift of the presence of Jesus. He's doing the thing that we would do when we encounter someone who's telling us about a health concern or something about their child, right? We ask the parents, like, tell us more. We're interested. We want to love you. We want to care for you. Help us to understand more of your life circumstances. Notice how Jesus provides this loving presence by turning to the Father who, by now, he came. He wanted healing for his son. He turned to the disciples of Jesus, hoping that he would provide. It didn't work, and so there he is desperate. And now Jesus says to him, "Let me understand more of your story. I want to hear your story. I want to express to you my love, my care for you." And I would say this is a significant element of healing. Turns out, if you look at Jesus and the way that he engages all of the healing situations that he does over and over again, you become aware of how much and how deeply he loves the people that he encounters. They're not just people, clients that he would interact with briefly and then he moves on. No, rather, there's a deep interest in their circumstances and what their life is all about. This is consistent in Jesus' practice. And so I think love is a pretty significant factor. And I think this is why sometimes when it comes to healing, we feel so deeply. We want the thing that we're praying for to come to be because we care so deeply for the people. The Apostle Paul captures this beautifully for us in 1 Corinthians. And he says this: "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but I have not love, I gain nothing." You notice, if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. Illustrating to us how important love is in this equation. Jesus embodies the love of his Father for the people that he's created. He acts on this love. Our interaction, our response to healing and to be praying for healing is motivated and should be motivated, it seems appropriate to be motivated by our deep love and care for the people that we're concerned about. We return to the story. And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible for one who believes." If you noticed in the previous text, the Father turns to Jesus and says to him, "If you can, could you please show compassion and heal my son?" I would say that there's a twinkle in Jesus' eye in this moment, because basically he's repeating the line to the Father to say, like, if you can. If you can? It's like, not that Jesus is ever prideful, but in this moment, don't you get the sense that he's sort of turning to the Father and going, "Do you have any idea who you're speaking to?" Like, if there's anyone who could strap on the Superman cape in the morning and be about fixing the world all day long, it's Jesus, right? He's the guy, right? So he sort of says to the dad, like, "Okay, I'm going to let that pass. But I'm just going to repeat it to you. Like, it sounds a little silly to me. I don't know how you feel about it. All things are possible for one who believes," right? He makes this very simple declaration. So now, notice the father's immediate response. Immediately, the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, help my unbelief." This is an incredibly powerful statement by the Father. This is an incredible, powerful thing because, yes, he has believed enough to come into the presence of Jesus, or certainly his disciples to begin with, hoping, longing to believe that they could attend to his son. But then it didn't happen, so now what's happened is doubt has crept in. He's beginning to wonder. Right, and this is our story. Let's be honest with one another. When it comes to our faith, sometimes we treat it like there's a box of faith. And so in this instance, we're going to pray for healing for somebody. We look inside our box of faith, and we're asking ourselves the question, is there enough in my faith box? Is there enough there for me to actually make a difference? And then what we notice is right next to the faith box is a doubt box. And we look inside that box and we realize there's some stuff in the doubt box. Okay, now how we have to deal something with this, because surely the doubt box diminishes the faith box. So how do we remove the doubt stuff? And then how do we make sure there's enough faith in the faith box so that we can get this done? Because there is this desire, this longing for us to have this faith that could in fact move mountains, motivated by love. Can you imagine the difference we could make? And in this instance, this father is turning to Jesus and saying to him, I have a faith box. I know there's some things in this faith box, but I want to name to you the reality. I also have a doubt box. And here what I'm doing is, in this moment when he cries, what he's saying to Jesus, the faith box is already yours, because that's my investment in you. But the doubt box, can I turn that over to you also? Jesus, can you be about this? Because here's the thing. When it comes to the conviction that we have about the powers of prayer, sometimes we put our faith not in Jesus, but we put it in our faith. Our faith in our faith. Do we have enough? No, the Father says, I'm going to turn over both these things to you. I'm going to say, it's about you, Jesus. It's not about how full my faith box is, and it's not about what my doubt box is about. I give these to you. I surrender these to you. I leave them with you to say, those are yours to worry about. That's not something I can do anything about. I will express my confidence in who you are, Jesus. The story unfolds further. And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit. Notice that, especially in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is determined. Yes, there's going to be miracles that he will perform to confirm that his message is powerful and compelling, and it sort of illustrates the fact that he did have the power that he possessed. But he's not about drawing a great deal of attention. That's not the thing. This is not about a spectacle. This is not about those kinds of things. And so as he sees more people rushing in, it's almost like he very quickly says, okay, let's just get this thing out of the way. And he says, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, he came out, and the boy was like a corpse. So that most of them said, he is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. The thing that we're hoping for, the thing that we hoped for at the beginning of the story has now come to be. Jesus has responded. Notice how Jesus' words address the spirit directly. And Jesus declares his authority by not only addressing the spirit to say, come out of the boy, but he also says to the spirit, you are not allowed back. You're not welcome here. Establishing his authority. It's a very simple prayer. There's no magic formula contained. There's no symbolic anything. It's literally just the words that he speaks. And he speaks and he says, I command this to happen. It's a very simple thing. Recently I was talking to my friend Lauren, who's part of this faith community, and we were talking about healing, and he left with me this line which has been really good. It's sort of been in my mind. And he said, he'd listened to this other speaker who had said, this is what happens. As believers, we often find it necessary to talk to our God about the size of our mountain. But the better approach is rather for us to tell our mountain about the size of our God. And this is what's happening here, right? Jesus is saying, I'm not going to give this spirit any more power. I'm simply going to speak to the spirit and say, I command you to disappear. And the spirit has no options. But I do want you to notice, and there's a reason why Mark captures this as part of the story, that this boy who has received healing for a moment appears to be dead and in need of resurrection. And I don't think Mark is suggesting that this death actually occurred, but here's God. He's not ever going to miss an opportunity to give us a hint of what is to come. The death and resurrection theme, which of course is such a critical part of Jesus' ministry. Here it is. It's a little reminder. And for me, reading this in the context of healing, it also reminds me that when we get to eternity, if we've declared that Jesus is our Lord, as Laura did this morning in this body of water here to say, Jesus is the Lord of my life, if we've done that, we will experience eternity with him. And on that other side of eternity, not on this side, but on the other side, we will experience full and complete healing. We will be the best version of ourselves, and there's a hint of that in the story. One last bit of the story. I love this. Classic Gospel of Mark. It also happens in other places in the Gospels where the disciples, after a very public thing has taken place, the disciples have a moment of debrief with Jesus afterwards. And so in this instance, and when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, no anxious father present, no distraught son in turmoil present, no critical, looking for fault scribes present, no curious onlookers present. This is just the disciples and Jesus. And they turn to him and say, why could we not cast it out? And if the text ended there, imagine what would all play in our minds as to what Jesus might respond. And we're hoping, again, for perhaps that magic formula, those specific words or that specific set of steps or actions that would help us to understand how this comes about. And Jesus says to them, this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer. It's like the simplest version, it's the simplest response. It's not about the numbers. It's not about a magic formula. It's not about those things. It's literally a simple prayer, a prayer declaring our confidence in Jesus and letting him be the one to heal. That's it. That's it. This is complicated for us. In the midst of all of this, where does that leave us? There's one other version that I want to share with you. One other thing that sometimes we lean on when it comes to praying for healing. We're hoping to have found the right thing. And that is the whole concept of I know a guy. Like, do you ever have something that needs to be fixed in your house and you say, I know a guy? Right, that thing. Sometimes when it comes to prayer, it's like, I know a guy. Like there's people, right? This happened to me in Thailand. Just a little over a year ago, I was in Thailand. I just spoken at the Grace Church in Chichen Sau, Thailand, and we had lunch together. We were in the courtyard, and we were just lingering there, having a nice time just meeting some of the people. And I got called over to a group of people that were gathered, and when I walked over there, they introduced to me a woman, and my journal tells me that her name started with A, but that's all I have. I probably didn't dare to try to write her a name, and I could not pronounce it to you because I just simply don't remember. But her name started with A. So there's a translator there to help me understand all of this. It turns out that she had been praying for some time for a husband. While the people that were gathered around her, some of the people on my team that were there, knew my story, and so they called me over because I, in this instance, was the guy. You see, because some years ago, I stood right here at the front of this stage, and a handful of women came forward. And they came to me and they said, based on what you just taught us this morning, we've come here and we're asking you that you would pray with us for husbands, because we're all looking for husbands. And I prayed for them. I attended some of those weddings. I officiated at least one of them. And so here I'm in Thailand. I'm known as the guy. If I pray for somebody, and so whatever. So imagine I went over. But I don't believe in this. Like, I don't believe that I'm the guy. That's not really what exists for me. And so here's the thing. I prayed. Yes, I prayed. What did I pray? I prayed that Jesus would do this thing, that Jesus would provide this particular, if you want, healing in her life, because there was just a deep longing. But I also knew that Jesus acts and was prompted by love. And so after the prayer, I spent a little bit of time talking with her, again through the translator. It turns out she's a gymnastics coach, and she was showing me a bunch of pictures of things she was doing in Thailand. Well, my wife, Hildy, is a gymnastics coach, so then I showed her some pictures of things that were happening in Winnipeg, and we had this moment of connection. So just a couple of weeks ago, I ran into the translator that was present at that moment when I was talking with the woman whose name starts with A, and I said to her, is there any news? We prayed for a husband. Has there been any developments? And I know this is a terrible way to end a sermon, but she's not yet married. But here's the thing, my friends. And this is what I want to invite you to. When it comes to healing, I invite you to surrender your understanding. I surrender my understanding of healing. and simply turn it over to Jesus and trust him for it. And the only part of the equation that we have, the only thing that is asked of us, is a simple prayer. So I want to put on the screen a sample of a simple prayer. Notice that in this instance, I've added some words to just acknowledge that this is about Jesus. And so the line starts, Jesus, because of your great love for us, would you please heal so-and-so, there's a blank, from a blank. And I invite you now, as we step into a sung worship time, that during this time, would you pray this prayer? You can pray it dozens of times about dozens of circumstances. Perhaps it'll include your name because there's healing that you need. But I can invite you to simply do that. Jesus, because of your great love for us, could you heal us from our unbelief?
Bob, there's some questions that I would say are repeated themes, and so I picked one I hope it represents. When someone is sick, I find myself afraid to specifically pray for a complete healing for fear of being disappointed if they don't actually get better. I pray God's will be done. It's meant to cushion the prayer. That way, if they don't get better, then the prayer was technically answered. Shrug emoji. How can I pray for healing with full faith, and how do I respond if it doesn't go as I hope?
Stop at the end of the prayer. Pray. That's your part. What happens after is up to Jesus. And I would say, and I'm not trying to be glib about this, but I really think that there are times when we take upon ourselves some of the burdens of things. Like I think about people who long for them to be involved with Jesus. And I realize I'm not the Savior. He is. So my thing is to pray, and then I leave it to him. And so in this instance, yes, the classic, what do you call it, disclaimer. Your will be done, right? In some ways modeled to us by Jesus, who says to his Father in the Garden of Gethsemane, like, I have this wish. I'd prefer for me not to go through with what you've got planned for me, but in the end, your will be done. And so I think we borrow from that. But it's not needed. The disclaimer is not needed, because what if we decide if our only job is to pray and then leave the outcome to him, then if our prayer doesn't lead to the outcome that we had prayed for, it's not on us. It may be mystifying. It may be upsetting. We may be disappointed, disappointed being a mild word, but in the end, that's the Jesus part. And so I would encourage you. Now, what does this do in terms of future? Like, will you dare to pray again? I think this is the part where we submit this thing to Jesus and say, I'll do my piece, and the rest I leave to you. And we do that over and over again. That, in some ways, is the faithfulness in what we can do. So,
Thank you so much for that. Here's a comment in relation to prayer and healing. God doesn't require us to pray for healing to happen. So why are we invited to do so? What's the lesson for us?
yeah. I think that we are invited into community. Like, our life, when we decide to follow Jesus, one of the characteristics of that is that it becomes other-minded. And so how do we express our care and our engagement and our interest, our love for the people around us? Here's a very practical thing. When somebody calls me, or when I call someone, say, there's this thing coming up, would you join me in prayer? Then I'm inviting you into praying. Don't believe in the numbers that somehow they're going to persuade something to happen, because the numbers I don't think are important. But to know that I'm not in this alone, to know that somebody's joining me, somebody that's also expressing our desire that Jesus would act, there's something very life-giving about that. And so, there are times when Jesus, I hardly prayed about the injury on my foot. Jesus designed my body so it would heal itself. So thank you, Jesus. You provided healing. There are parts, Jesus could act without us, but he's inviting us into community with him.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much for sharing that. Lastly, I'll just ask this question. How can we discern the occasion to pray for healing when the person may not consider their circumstances requiring healing or prayer?
Follow the prompt of the Spirit. But I think at the root of that question is a really thoughtful one, and that is that we don't want to impose ourselves upon someone else, and so we do want to respect people's circumstances. So just to say, and we do pray for healing at the front of the stage after the service quite frequently, but in that moment, and again, I'm trying to avoid the formula or the magic potion in this, but I will ask the person, is it okay if I place my hand on your shoulder? And if you've ever observed this, you likely will see my other hand rise up, because I'm trying to illustrate that this thing doesn't stop with me. I am just a conduit. I'm a signpost to Jesus. And so I want to be very deliberate about that so that the person receiving this, but I ask the question, can I place my hand on your shoulder? Because I don't want to impose or invade someone's personal space without respecting them. So in this instance, if you know that this person isn't themselves thinking about that they need healing from this, it's entirely okay for you to simply add them to your prayer journal. Never inform them of the fact that you're praying for them. If you think that that might upset them or in some ways cause a negative reaction, you can pray for them all you want. Trust. Yeah.
Trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. The definition of amen is so be it. I think that's kind of that's kind of the posture that I hold when it comes to praying for healing. So be it. Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen. This is all for your glory, no matter what. Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing with us, and would you lead us in the close?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. The week leading up to the start of the series, I walked into the space and I saw the stage. I was overwhelmed. Our visual arts team expresses worship in the artistic expression, the way they assemble visuals that support things, and the way they do things with their hands, the way they shape images and pictures for us. And so it's this incredible stage that features all of these boxes. You might not have noticed this, but over at the cross is a table that has a pyramid of white boxes on it. The invitation to you is as follows. You'll see that there's a little sign that says, take this box as a reminder of the all, that this is something we surrender. I would invite you to do that. Go and take a box, and if we run out there, don't be afraid to grab some of these. I think the visual arts team has more so that we don't destroy the stage setup. But here's the thing. Take this box with you. For this series, until we get to Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday, put it in a prominent place in your home as a reminder of your longing for healing, perhaps for you or for another circumstance, and as a reminder to be faithful in doing your part, which is to pray the simple prayer. And let this fill your home with, if you want, a measure of expectation of what might come to be. What stories might we tell as a result of paying attention, inviting Jesus to bring his healing presence into the circumstances of the people that we love and care for. So please, make sure you grab one on your way out. And listen, I want to say this to you. Coming here on a Sunday morning, spending time with you, is just one of the highlights of my week every time. And so as you go into a time of sharing and talking with one another, would you be blessed? And then be blessed in the week. And then we'll see you next Sunday, and we'll carry on with the series and learn some more. Jesus, heal us from our unbelief.